"Look, Claire," Donovan said, adjusting his expensive tie with a casual flick of his wrist. "You've worked extremely hard for Apex Tech Solutions, but for the Senior Director of Operations role, we need someone with a true executive vision, someone with a natural, authoritative presence. Because of that, the promotion is going to Marcus." Orch. I sat completely still, my hands folded calmly in my lap, processing his words without moving a single muscle. I turned my head slowly toward the man sitting across from me. Marcus, my 32-year-old brother-in-law, was leaning back in his ergonomic leather chair. Orch. He was the kind of guy with a $1 million Hollywood smile, smooth talking skills, and an incredible amount of unearned confidence that somehow managed to fool the exact people it shouldn't, like upper management. He was an absolute master at taking credit for other people's hard work. Specifically, mine. Orch. For the past 2 years, just to keep the peace at Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners, I had quietly covered for his endless mistakes, fixed his broken quarterly reports, and handled tough client complaints behind the scenes. Now his arrogance was on full display. He gave me a sly, triumphant smirk, eyes gleaming with victory. Click. Click. Orch. The sound broke the suffocating silence of the glass-walled Chicago conference room. He was repeatedly clicking a black and silver pen. It wasn't ordinary office supply. It was a $500 Mont Blanc Meisterstück. 2 years ago, when he was unemployed for 6 months, I risked my own professional reputation to use my personal connections and land him a job at Apex. Orch. That pen was the exact congratulations gift I bought him. Now he sat across from me, casually stealing the promotion I had worked 70 unpaid hours a week to earn. "Don't take it too hard, Claire," Marcus said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished mahogany table in what he clearly thought was an authoritative posture. "Orch, you're still an essential part of the engine here. I'll definitely need you on my team to keep managing those dry Excel spreadsheets. You're just so uniquely talented at the tedious grunt work." I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice or throw a fit. Instead, a cold, crystal-clear clarity swept over me. The puzzle pieces in my head clicked together instantly. This wasn't just a corporate betrayal. Orch. This was a total family ambush. The echo of a phone call from the night before rang loudly in my memory. My mother, Eleanor, had called right as I was finalizing my pitch deck for the position. Her tone had been urgent and demanding, completely devoid of any concern for how I felt. "Claire," my mother had said over the speaker, "you need to step aside for this promotion." Orch. "Marcus needs this far more than you do. Chloe is 29 and expecting her first child. They're looking at a 5-bedroom house in Naperville, and Marcus needs a higher base salary to get approved for the mortgage. You're a single woman with no family to support. It's your responsibility as a sister to help them. Family takes care of family." Orch. She had literally ordered me to wreck my own career, just so her spoiled baby daughter could live out a perfect suburban fantasy, all funded by a useless husband who didn't even know how to run a basic database query. I had firmly refused her ridiculous demand last night. But clearly, my mother found another way. Orch. She must have put pressure on Marcus to go behind my back, butter up Donovan on the golf course, and steal the job that was practically created for me. They were all waiting for me to argue. They expected me to beg, or maybe offer to coach Marcus so he could seamlessly take the credit and a massive pay bump. Donovan looked at me, expecting compliance. Orch. Marcus kept clicking that expensive pen, waiting for me to nod and accept my role in the shadows. Instead, I stood up. My movements were slow and deliberate. I reached up and unclipped my employee badge from my blazer. The plastic ID card felt practically weightless in my hand. I tossed it onto the mahogany table. It landed with a sharp snap right on top of my discarded performance review. Orch. I looked Marcus straight in the eyes, watching his smirking face freeze for a fraction of a second. Then, I looked at Donovan, whose face suddenly registered confusion. They had been brainwashed by corporate culture to believe that employees would swallow any insult, just to keep a biweekly paycheck. Orch. And my toxic family had misled them into believing I would forever sacrifice myself for their happiness. They were dead wrong. Good luck with your spreadsheets, I said, my voice steady and terrifyingly calm. I didn't stay to hear their hollow excuses or desperate attempts to call me back. I turned around, pushed open the heavy glass door, and walked out of that room for good. I quit. Orch. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind me, sealing their stunned silence inside the conference room. My heels clicked sharp and fast against the polished concrete floor. I wasn't running. I walked with deliberate precision, like someone who had just set off a bomb and was casually walking away from the fire. Orch. Wait! Marcus hissed behind me, his expensive leather shoes slapping frantically against the floor. I ignored him and walked straight to my desk in the middle of the open office layout. The entire floor was a sea of gray cubicles and humming monitors. I grabbed a small cardboard box and threw in a few picture frames, my favorite coffee mug, and the ergonomic mouse I bought with my own money. Orch. Claire, stop right now. Marcus barked under his breath, nervously checking the room. You're making a scene. You're embarrassing the family. Do you hear me? Marcus grabbed the edge of my desk. If Mom finds out about this, she's going to lose her mind. Chloe needs that house. You can't just throw a tantrum and quit because you didn't get what you wanted. Orch. Stop packing. Come back to the conference room right now and apologize to Donovan before he actually accepts your resignation. I didn't waste a single syllable on him. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. What is going on out here? Donovan bellowed, shoving the conference room door wide open. The entire floor froze instantly. Orch. Donovan's face was turning a dangerous shade of red as he marched down the central aisle. You listen to me, Claire? Donovan shouted, pointing a finger directly at my face. You don't get to just walk out of my office. You don't throw your badge on my table. If you step foot out of this building today, I promise you, you will never work in corporate logistics again. Orch. I know every major player in this industry. One phone call from me, and your career is over. You will be blacklisted from coast to coast. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the floor. My coworkers stared at me with wide eyes, waiting for me to apologize, waiting for me to break under the pressure of an executive who held the power to destroy my professional future. Orch. In the corporate world, getting blacklisted by someone like him was practically a career death sentence. But I didn't flinch, and I didn't look away. Instead, I reached down and picked up the only thing on my desk that actually mattered, my personal laptop. I opened the silver MacBook and lifted the screen. What are you doing? Marcus asked, his voice trembling slightly. Orch. He tried to peek at my screen, but I angled it away. I was executing a script I had prepared months ago, just in case this exact scenario ever happened. Apex Tech Solutions handled billions of dollars in freight and shipping logistics every single day. But their legacy software was a broken, disorganized mess. Orch. For the past 3 years, the entire company had only run smoothly because of a proprietary back-end routing system. It was an advanced algorithm capable of automating complex supply chain problems, cutting delivery times in half and saving the company millions in operational costs. Donovan assumed the company's IT department built it. Orch. Marcus bragged to anyone who would listen that it was developed under his brilliant leadership. The truth was completely different. I built it. It was code I wrote entirely from scratch on my own personal device, during my own free time late at night. I held complete control over the source code. Orch. I legally owned every piece of that intellectual property through a private business entity registered under the name Nexus Freight Dynamics LLC. Out of a simple desire to make my own job easier and keep clients happy, I had granted Apex a free, revocable end-user license agreement. My fingers flew across the keyboard, 10 keystrokes. That was all it took. Orch. I accessed the routing system's administrative dashboard. I clicked the main control panel, and I initiated the termination protocol. I revoked the access keys connecting my private servers to the Apex network. I watched the progress bar reach 100%. A tiny green checkmark appeared on the screen, confirming a complete disconnection. Torch. Satisfied, I snapped the laptop shut and carefully placed it into my cardboard box. I set the charger on top and organized my things to make sure nothing would spill or break on the drive home. I took one last look at the desk. This was where I had sacrificed my time, energy, and sanity for ungrateful management and a brother-in-law who stole my work. Torch. Now, the desk was completely bare, reflecting the harsh overhead lights. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life!" Donovan sneered, crossing his arms, furious that his public display of authority hadn't forced my compliance. He had absolutely no idea what kind of digital bomb I had just detonated. He thought I was giving up a steady paycheck. Torch. He had no idea I was walking away with the keys to his entire operational empire. I picked up the box. It felt weightless. I turned to face Marcus, who was standing frozen next to my cubicle. His arrogant posture was completely gone, replaced by a rigid, terrified tension. I looked him straight in the eyes and gave him a slow, chilling smile. There wasn't a trace of warmth in it. Torch. It was the look of a predator, making him involuntarily step back. He suddenly realized he had no idea how to do the job he had just stolen. Without my system, his promotion wasn't even worth the paper it was printed on. Without a word, I walked past Donovan. The sound of my heels echoed loudly in the silent room. Torch. I kept my head high, posture perfect, and walked straight to the elevators, pressing the down button. The button lit up with a soft white glow. I watched the floor numbers count down from the top. The entire office was watching me. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, and even the phones seemed to stop ringing. The soft chime of the elevator arriving sounded deafening in the heavy quiet. Torch. The polished metal doors slid open. I stepped inside. As the heavy doors slowly closed, cutting off my view of Donovan's red face and Marcus's panicked eyes, I turned to face the room one last time. The ride down took exactly 40 seconds. I didn't shed a single tear, and I didn't feel a trace of panic. Instead, a deep, icy relief washed over me. Torch. For years, I had carried the crushing weight of my family's unreasonable expectations, working myself to the bone to keep the peace while they eagerly handed my hard-earned success to my brother-in-law. That suffocating weight was finally gone. I walked out of the Apex building into the bright Chicago afternoon sun and took a deep breath of fresh air. Torch. I got into my car, threw the box onto the passenger seat, and pulled out my smartphone. The screen was flashing wildly with incoming calls from HR and frantic text messages from my mother. No doubt Marcus was blowing up her phone about my sudden departure, and Eleanor was getting ready to hold me accountable. I didn't read a single message. Torch. I held down the power button, watched the screen go completely dark, and tossed the phone into the glove compartment. I drove home in silence, enjoying the unusually smooth traffic on Interstate 90. My apartment welcomed me with a peace I had deeply missed. I kicked off my heels, threw my blazer over an armchair, and walked into the kitchen. Torch. I pulled out a bottle of California Cabernet I had been saving. Today was a special day worth celebrating. I poured a glass, set my laptop on the kitchen island, and sat down. As the setting sun cast long shadows across the room, I opened my encrypted file system. It was time to review the legal protection I had spent 3 years building. I clicked into a folder named Nexus Freight Dynamics. Torch. This was my privately registered business entity, created 3 years ago when I realized how terribly inefficient Apex's supply chain was. Back then, I had brought a proposal to Donovan to build an automated routing system. He laughed in my face, telling me that creating proprietary software was way above my pay grade and completely unnecessary. So I built it myself. Torch. I sacrificed countless weekends to write an advanced logistics framework that could predict transit delays, reroute delivery trucks in real time, and calculate optimal fuel usage. Once it was complete, I quietly integrated it into my daily workflow to lighten my own load. Within 2 months, my department's productivities skyrocketed. Torch. Soon, the entire company was relying on the flawless data outputs generated by my system. Marcus took full credit for the seamless operations, claiming his amazing leadership was driving profit growth. But they never owned the machine. They were just enjoying the results it produced. I had drafted an airtight software license under Nexus Freight Dynamics LLC. Torch. The contract granted Apex a free revocable license to use the routing code. Because they never paid me a single dollar for the software, and because I developed it entirely outside of company hours on personal hardware, my intellectual property rights under American law were rock solid. Torch. A key clause in the agreement explicitly stated that the creator retained the absolute right to terminate access at any time, without prior warning, for any reason. By making those 10 keystrokes at my desk, I was simply exercising my legal right as the sole owner of that software. I took a slow sip of my wine. Apex handled hundreds of thousands of active shipping routes every day. Torch. Without my algorithm constantly calculating and correcting the logistics network in the background, their corporate network was essentially a blind giant running toward a cliff. I closed my laptop, finished my wine, and decided to enjoy a nice, long weekend. For the next 72 hours, I lived in total peace. I didn't look at a computer screen or check my email. Torch. I went for long runs in the park by Lake Michigan, read an entire novel, and slept 8 full hours every night. I woke up without the crushing anxiety of having to fix Marcus's latest disaster, or deal with my mother's manipulative emotional games. The world outside my apartment kept turning, but my personal universe was completely tranquil. Torch. On Monday morning, bright sunlight streamed through the bedroom blinds. I stretched, brewed a cup of black coffee, and decided the silent period was officially over. It was time to assess the damage. I retrieved my phone from the glove compartment of my car and plugged it into the charger on the kitchen island. I pressed the power button and waited for the device to boot up. Torch. The moment the screen lit up, the phone froze. It started vibrating violently against the granite countertop, releasing an endless barrage of notifications. The screen was completely flooded with red warning alerts. I picked up the device and checked the lock screen. 90 missed calls, 154 text messages. The notifications painted a picture of absolute corporate disaster. Torch. Donovan alone had called 20 times. Marcus had called 30 times. The rest were from panicked executives, board members, and my hysterical parents. I scrolled through the text messages. Claire, the entire freight network is down. Call me back immediately. It's Donovan. What did you do to the system? We are losing millions every minute. Pick up. Claire, please. Torch. Clients are canceling contracts. You have to fix this. How could you do this to your family? Marcus is crying in his office. Apex's national network had completely collapsed. Thousands of trucks were stranded at distribution centers with zero routing instructions. Major corporate clients were left entirely in the dark. Torch. The company was bleeding money by the minute, and the executive team was in total panic mode. And my brother-in-law, the newly minted senior director of operations, was left completely exposed, proving he didn't even know how to get the system back online. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Torch. The snowball had officially started rolling down the hill, and it was about to crush everyone who had taken my hard work for granted. Before I could even set my coffee cup down, heavy, aggressive banging echoed through my apartment. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a frantic, violent pounding, hard enough to rattle the picture frames hanging in my hallway. Torch. I glanced at the digital clock on the microwave. It was just past 8 in the morning. Nobody showed up unannounced at this hour unless they were a salesperson or completely out of options. Judging by the digital chaos on my phone, I knew exactly which category my visitors belonged to. Barefoot, I walked silently across the hardwood floor toward the front door. Torch. I didn't even bother looking through the peephole. I reached out, turned the lock, and pulled the door open. My toxic family was standing in the hallway like an angry mob ready to storm a castle. My sister, Chloe, stood near the back, clutching her Hermes bag so tightly. Her knuckles were white over her pregnant stomach. George, my mother, Eleanor, and my father, Arthur, stood on either side of the doorway, their faces marked with anger and exhaustion. But the person leading the charge was Marcus. Before I could even say hello, Marcus shoved his way past me. Without asking for permission, he burst into my sanctuary, bringing the chaotic energy of his crumbling corporate career straight into my living room. Porch. My parents and Chloe followed right behind him, forming a wall of hostility in my entryway. Marcus looked nothing like the polished executive who had smirked at me in the glass conference room 3 days ago. His expensive suit jacket was wrinkled and stained with spilled coffee. His tie hung loosely around his neck, twisted out of shape from sheer panic. His eyes were bloodshot from a total lack of sleep, and beads of sweat glistened on his forehead. He didn't look like a senior director of operations. He looked like a gambler watching his entire life go up in flames. "Fix it!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking as he paced across my living room rug. "Claire, you need to fix it right now. Turn the system back on. Give us the admin password." I calmly closed the front door and leaned my back against the solid wood. I crossed my arms, watching him lose his mind. "Fix what, Marcus?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "I don't work for Apex Tech Solutions anymore. Your operational issues are, by definition, your problem. Don't play word games with me," Marcus roared, pointing a trembling finger at my face. The entire shipping network is dead. We have thousands of trucks selling at distribution centers all over the country. Drivers can't get routes, and warehouses can't process inventory. The automated scheduling software is demanding an encryption key, and nobody in the entire IT department has any idea what it is. You changed the master password and locked us all out. I watched his chest heave as he struggled to catch his breath. Seeing the sheer panic in his eyes was almost an art form. He had spent years climbing over my hard work, pretending my efforts were the result of his brilliant strategy. Now, faced with an actual technical crisis, the new director was as helpless as a baby. The Vanguard logistics account is falling apart, Marcus continued, his voice rising in pitch. Vanguard is our largest client. They move millions of dollars in freight every day. Their regional manager has been calling my personal phone since Friday night, demanding to know why their entire supply chain is frozen. If we don't restore the routing system by noon today, Vanguard is canceling their contract. If they cancel, Apex goes bankrupt. Do you have any idea what you've done? Hand over the admin password right now. He lunged forward, stopping just inches from me. He was trying to use a tactic he often used during family arguments, using his physical presence to intimidate me into backing down. But I didn't flinch. I didn't look down. I stood my ground, staring right into his bloodshot eyes. "I don't owe you anything, Marcus," I said softly. "You wanted that leadership position. You wanted the title, the salary, and the corner office. Well, congratulations, you got everything you asked for. Real leaders figure out how to solve catastrophic network failures on their own. I suggest you get back to the office and start coding." Marcus let out a roar of absolute frustration. "You are deliberately sabotaging my career out of jealousy," he spat, his face twisted in rage. "That's why you're doing this. You're bitter, because Donovan finally recognized my talent. You're throwing a destructive tantrum because you can't accept losing a promotion to a better candidate. You locked the system just to embarrass me in front of the board. You're trying to ruin my life simply because you're jealous of me." His accusation was so completely detached from reality that I almost laughed out loud. Marcus actually believed the story he had made up in his head. He genuinely thought he was brilliant, completely ignoring the absurd fact that he was standing in my living room, begging me to save the very company he claimed to lead. His arrogance was staggering, but his desperation was equally obvious. He needed me to give in. Porch. He expected me to bow my head, apologize for causing a scene, and hand over the keys to my proprietary software just to restore a fake family peace. My mother stepped forward, placing herself between Marcus and me. She assumed her familiar role as the ultimate family mediator, though her idea of mediation always involved forcing me to sacrifice my dignity to please her younger daughter's husband. Porch. Eleanor looked at me with deep disappointment, the exact same look she used during my teenage years to make me feel small and worthless. She reached out and grabbed my sleeve. "Claire, please, stop being so difficult," Eleanor said, her voice dropping into a sickly sweet tone she used whenever she tried to manipulate me into obeying. "You know your brother-in-law didn't mean those harsh words. Porch. He's just under an immense amount of pressure right now. We are a family, Claire. You need to fix this system for him." I yanked my arm out of her grip. I took a step back, breaking the physical connection she was trying to use for emotional leverage. Arthur stepped into the gap. He puffed out his chest, trying to display the stern patriarchal authority he thought he still held over me. Porch. "Listen to your mother," Arthur commanded, his voice dripping with condescension. "Your behavior right now is completely out of line. We didn't raise you to be so vindictive. Marcus is just trying to do his job and provide for your sister. You should be helping him succeed, not throwing obstacles in his path just because your ego took a tiny hit at work. Porch. Give him the password, apologize for this ridiculous scene, and we can all move past this." "A tiny hit to my ego?" I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I built the entire logical framework that is currently keeping that company running. I handed him every report, every strategy, and every presentation that got him that promotion. And you call my reaction a tiny hit to my ego? Porch. You call it vindictive when I refuse to keep being your doormat?" Eleanor threw her hands in the air, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "How can you be so selfish?" she screamed, completely dropping her sweet mediator act. The veins in her neck bulged as she pointed sharply at Marcus and Chloe. "Marcus is the provider for this family. Chloe is pregnant. Porch. They are trying to build a life, a real future for themselves. And you are trying to destroy it all just because you are miserable and alone. This is just like when you refused to co-sign her car loan. You have always been obsessed with watching your sister fail." The air in the living room suddenly felt charged. Porch. Mentioning that car loan was a weapon she had used against me for years, but this time, it was a massive mistake. I felt a cold, hard smile creep onto my face. I walked straight up to my mother, forcing her to look me in the eye. "Are you referring to the car loan you demanded I pay for using my community college tuition money?" I asked, my voice cutting through the room like a sharp blade. Porch. My mother flinched, but I didn't stop. "You demanded I drain the bank account I built by working late-night shifts at a diner. You ordered me to give up my entire education fund so Chloe could buy a brand new luxury Mercedes she couldn't afford. I worked nights serving tables to pay for my tuition, while you and Dad bought Chloe a Mercedes in cash as a high school graduation gift. Porch. Is that the loan you're talking about?" Arthur stepped in front of Eleanor, his face beet red. "Don't you talk to your mother like that," he roared. "We gave you a roof over your head. We gave you everything you needed to succeed." "You gave Chloe everything she wanted," I corrected him instantly, keeping my composure. "You gave me a roof and an endless list of demands." Porch. "You expected me to wear hand-me-downs and study on the floor of a basement apartment just to fund her luxury lifestyle. You built a pedestal for her and expected me to willingly lay down as the step stool. That dynamic is officially over. I am not going to fund Marcus's unearned corporate success any more than I funded Chloe's luxury car." Right on cue, Chloe let out a sharp, dramatic gasp. Porch. She stumbled backward against the wall, instantly cupping her rounded stomach with both hands. Tears pooled in her eyes, smearing her expensive makeup. "Oh my God," Chloe wailed, her voice carrying a practiced fragility. "This stress is too much for the baby. Marcus, it hurts. My stomach hurts." Claire is doing this on purpose. She wants me to lose that house. She wants me to lose everything. Orch. Marcus rushed to her side, wrapping his arms protectively around her shoulders. He glared at me with pure hatred, completely ignoring the fact that his own incompetence was the sole cause of this entire disaster. "Look at what you're doing to your pregnant sister," Marcus yelled, his voice echoing off the walls. "You're a monster, Claire! A cold-blooded, heartless monster!" Orch. "Oh, honey!" Eleanor rushed to Chloe's side, rubbing her back and making soothing noises. "We need to get her out of here," Eleanor said in terror. "The toxic energy in this room is far too dangerous for her. Claire, I hope you're happy with yourself. You are actively destroying this family." I stood in the middle of my living room, quietly watching their dramatic performance unfold. Orch. It was the exact same script they had followed my entire life. Make an unreasonable demand, accuse me of being selfish the second I refused, and then have Chloe play the fragile victim to force my submission through overwhelming guilt. For 33 years, that tactic had worked like a charm. Every single time she cried, every single time they called me selfish, I eventually caved. Orch. I would write the checks, finish the homework, fix the spreadsheets, step aside, and apologize just for existing. Not today. Today, the script was being rewritten, and I was the one holding the pen. The guilt that used to paralyze me felt completely powerless now, looking totally transparent and pitiful. I watched Chloe peeking out at me from behind her hands, waiting for me to break. Orch. I turned my back on her little show and walked straight into the kitchen. I picked up my coffee cup from the granite countertop. The ceramic mug still held a comforting warmth in my palm. I brought it to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The rich, dark roast anchored me. Orch. The frantic screaming, artificial tears, and aggressive posturing happening in my living room felt like a cheap soap opera playing on mute. I was completely unmoved. The chaotic energy they brought into my home simply bounced right off my absolute calm. I walked out of the kitchen and leaned against the island, holding the mug in both hands. Orch. I watched my mother stroke Chloe's hair while my father continued to glare at me with righteous anger. Marcus was still holding my sister, offering quiet words of comfort while sending venomous glares my way over her shoulder. They were all waiting for my surrender, expecting me to panic at the sight of Chloe's distress. "Are you done with your performance?" I asked. Orch. My voice didn't echo, and I didn't yell. It sliced right through their noise like a scalpel. My father opened his mouth to launch into another speech about family loyalty, but I raised a firm finger. The gesture was so sharp and unexpected that it actually shut him up. Orch. Since we're all gathered here today to discuss Marcus's booming career, let's talk about his actual qualifications, I said, staying relaxed against the kitchen island. Let's talk about the new senior director of operations. I looked straight at my parents, who suddenly seemed extremely confused. For the past 2 years, Marcus hasn't produced a single original piece of data analysis. Orch. Every single quarterly report he submitted to the executive board was generated using my custom Excel templates. Every single one. If you asked him to build a pivot table right now, he'd break out in a cold sweat. If you asked him to explain the supply chain bottlenecks in the Midwest corridor, he would just recite the summary paragraphs I typed out for him on Tuesdays. Orch. Marcus stepped back from Chloe, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "Claire, shut your mouth," he demanded, his voice cracking with panic. He lunged forward a step, but my father put a hand on his arm to stop him. Arthur looked at Marcus, then back at me, a sliver of doubt finally piercing through his arrogant patriarchal posture. Orch. "He doesn't understand logistics management at all," I continued, my voice steady and relentless. "He doesn't know how to write code, and he doesn't understand back-end routing architecture. His entire workday consists of organizing catered lunches and playing golf with Donovan while I manage the freight network from my cubicle." Orch. "The only reason the Vanguard logistics account stayed with Apex is because I personally monitored their shipping routes every single weekend." Marcus got that promotion because he was exceptionally skilled at taking credit for my late nights. He's a great actor, just like Chloe. But acting doesn't fix a catastrophic network failure, and acting won't restart a frozen supply chain. Orch. You are lying, Eleanor gasped, clutching her pearl necklace in a gesture so melodramatic it belonged on a Broadway stage. Marcus is a brilliant executive. Donovan said so himself at the holiday party. You are making up these horrible lies to ruin his reputation simply because you are a bitter, twisted woman. I set my coffee cup down hard on the countertop with a heavy thud. Orch. I'm not lying, Eleanor. I am explaining precisely why that company is currently bleeding millions of dollars. Because the system running Apex doesn't belong to Apex at all. It belongs to me. A dead silence fell over the living room. The distant hum of city traffic outside my window suddenly sounded incredibly loud. Arthur frowned, his thick eyebrows pulling together in deep confusion. Orch. What on earth are you talking about? Arthur asked, the aggression draining from his voice. You worked for them. They legally own everything you created during your employment. That is how employment law works in this country. Claire, stop making up these ridiculous stories to justify your actions. I shook my head slowly, pitying his ignorance. Orch. I built that automated routing system on my own personal time. I wrote the source code on my private laptop, right here at this kitchen island on weekends and evenings. Apex never paid me a single dime for development work, and I never signed an intellectual property assignment agreement. 3 years ago, I legally registered a limited liability company. Orch. I filed copyrights and patents with the federal government under my private business entity. The software Marcus claims to manage belongs entirely to my independent LLC. The word LLC hit the room like a heavy brick. My parents were completely stunned. Orch. In their minds, their quiet, compliant daughter, the one they easily pushed around, could never have built a legal business entity and secured intellectual property behind their backs. It was completely beyond their comprehension. They had spent my entire life underestimating my intelligence, viewing me merely as a support system for Chloe and her husband. Orch. The realization that I was a business owner holding the lifeblood of a corporate empire broke their brains. Eleanor opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Arthur looked over at Marcus, whose pale, terrified face confirmed every single word I had just said. Marcus knew I was telling the truth. He knew his entire career had been built on sand, and I had just swept that sand away. Orch. I granted Apex a free software license, I explained, driving the final nail into the coffin. Because they never paid my LLC a penny in technology fees, that license was completely revocable at my discretion. When Donovan insulted me and gave my position to a man who can't even run a basic data query, I simply revoked the license. I logged off, took my private property, and went home. Orch. I didn't destroy a thing. I just took back what legally belonged to me. Marcus stared at me, searching for a counter-argument that didn't exist. The brutal reality was finally sinking in. He couldn't charm his way back into the missing source code. His operational network was completely dead. Humiliation washed over his face, quickly morphing into malicious rage. Orch. He took a sudden step toward me, his hands clenched into tight fists. You think you're so smart, don't you? Marcus spat, his voice trembling with fear and malice. You think you can just shut down a logistics network and walk away? Donovan has already called the authorities. His corporate legal team is drafting a lawsuit right now. They are tracing your digital footprint. Orch, you are going to federal prison for corporate sabotage, Claire. You're going to end up in a cell, and I will be testifying against you in court. Marcus pointed his finger directly in my face. They will destroy you financially. They will drain your bank accounts. You'll spend the rest of your life paying damages to Apex. Orch. Hand over the access keys right now, and I might be able to convince Donovan not to press criminal charges. His threats were completely hollow. Marcus didn't know the first thing about intellectual property law, and Donovan was nothing more than a workplace bully. Looking at Marcus, I felt a deep sense of pity. He was like a cornered animal barking at a concrete wall. Ouch. Before I could dissect his absurd legal threats, my father stepped in. Arthur walked around my mother, his face settling into a cold, stern mask. He completely ignored the fact that his son-in-law had just threatened me with federal prison. All Arthur cared about was preserving the illusion of his perfect family. "Claire, listen to me," Arthur commanded, his voice dropping into a stern tone. "Ouch. I don't care about your little software company, and I don't care who wrote the code or who gets the credit. Enough of this nonsense. Go to your bedroom right now, get your laptop, and hand it over to Marcus. You are going to do this for the sake of our family's honor. We will not allow our family name to be dragged through the mud because of your selfish behavior." Ouch. He was completely willing to force me to hand over a multi-million-dollar asset just so he could save face at the country club. He wanted me to give my private property to a man who had actively stolen my career path. "I am not handing over my laptop," I declared, my voice dangerously calm. "You will do as you're told," Arthur bellowed, taking a heavy step toward me. Ouch. He reached out his hand, fully expecting me to cower under his authority, just like I had for the last 33 years. "Hand over the machine right now, or you will regret it." I didn't flinch, and I didn't bother arguing the legalities of corporate sabotage with men who refused to understand the law. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. Ouch. As I unlocked the screen, I kept my eyes locked on my father. They watched me, a sudden hesitation rippling through their aggressive stance. They expected tears. They expected an argument. They never expected absolute icy detachment. I opened the phone app. I deliberately tapped the number 9, then the number 1, and then another one. Ouch. I turned the glowing screen around so my father, mother, Chloe, and Marcus could clearly see the digits typed on the display. My thumb hovered right over the green call button. "You have exactly 30 seconds to get out of my home, or I am reporting an home invasion," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like breaking glass. Ouch. "I will tell the dispatcher that 4 hostile individuals forced their way into my apartment, are threatening me, and that I fear for my physical safety. The local police station is 3 blocks away. Officers will be here in less than 5 minutes." Eleanor gasped, grabbing Arthur's arm. "Claire, you wouldn't dare call the police on your own parents." Ouch. "Try me," I replied, my thumb less than an inch from the screen. 20 seconds. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Their arrogant sense of entitlement vanished, replaced by pure panic. My parents had spent their entire lives maintaining a spotless public image. Ouch. The mere thought of uniformed officers escorting them out of a residential building in handcuffs was a nightmare they couldn't afford. "We're leaving," Arthur snapped, grabbing Eleanor's elbow and pushing her toward the front door. "She has completely lost her mind. She's insane." Chloe let out a dramatic wail, holding onto Marcus's arm as they stumbled toward the exit. Ouch. "You are an awful sister," Chloe cried out, her face twisted in genuine rage as her victim act completely collapsed. "I hope you rot in this apartment! I hope Donovan ruins you!" As Marcus backed out the door, he glared at me with pure venom. "This isn't over, Claire," he threatened, his voice shaking. "You're going to pay for this. You will lose everything." Ouch. 10 seconds, I counted out loud, never taking my eyes off them. They stumbled out into the hallway, leaving behind a chaotic mess of curses, tears, and a panicked retreat. Arthur slammed my front door behind them so hard the walls vibrated. I stood in my living room, listening to their hurried footsteps echo down the corridor, followed by the distant chime of the elevator arriving. Ouch. I lowered my phone and cleared the digits from the screen. Silence finally returned to my apartment. The intrusion was over. My family had shown me exactly who they were, and I had shown them just how far I was willing to go. I walked to the front door, turned the deadbolt, and fastened the security chain. I smiled, feeling a profound sense of victory. I was ready for a war. I was more than ready. Ouch. The next morning, I stepped out of a cab in front of a high-end steakhouse in downtown Chicago. It was the kind of premier spot where executives finalized multi-million-dollar deals over dry-aged steaks and chilled martinis. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors, walked past the busy bar area, and followed the host straight to a secluded leather booth tucked away in the back corner. Waiting for me there was my attorney, Harrison. Harrison was 60 years old, an absolute shark in the field of intellectual property and corporate litigation. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, he radiated total, unshakable confidence. We had been working together quietly, ever since I first realized the immense commercial value of the code I was writing for Apex 3 years ago. I slid into the booth across from him and immediately pulled a thick, slightly crumpled envelope out of my designer tote bag. "Good morning, Claire," Harrison said, taking a slow sip of sparkling water. "For a woman whose former employer is currently making national business news due to a catastrophic operational breakdown, you look remarkably well rested." I smiled and set the envelope directly on the white linen tablecloth. "I slept a full 8 hours," I replied, sliding the documents toward him. "But it looks like Donovan and his legal team pulled an all-nighter. A courier delivered this to my apartment building at 6 this morning." Harrison picked up the envelope, pulled out the thick stack of legal documents, and adjusted his reading glasses. It was an official cease and desist order from Apex Tech Solutions, packed with aggressive corporate jargon. It demanded that I immediately hand over all administrative passwords, threatened a massive civil lawsuit for breach of contract, and even accused me of corporate espionage. I watched Harrison quickly scan the aggressive terms. I expected him to frown, or at least pull out a pen to mark the legal threats. Instead, Harrison threw his head back and laughed out loud. It was a rich, booming laugh that caused a nearby server to glance over at our table. Harrison tossed the document back onto the table like a piece of trash. "This is almost pathetic," Harrison chuckled, taking off his glasses. "The entire document is nothing but corporate bluffing and hot air. Donovan is terrified and his legal team is desperately grasping at straws. They have zero legal standing and they know it." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. "You're absolutely certain the intellectual property filings are airtight?" I asked, needing verbal confirmation to settle the adrenaline still lingering in my veins from yesterday's family intrusion. "Claire, your documentation is completely flawless," Harrison assured me, his tone shifting to absolute authority. 3 years ago, when we registered Nexus Freight Dynamics LLC, we filed comprehensive patents and secured federal copyrights for every single line of source code you created. We logged all the digital timestamps, proving you built the entire architecture on your personal server strictly outside of your contracted hours at Apex, using your own hardware. You never signed a non-compete claiming secondary development rights, and you never signed an IP assignment clause. You own this software outright. Harrison paused before continuing. Apex was operating under a free, revocable end-user license agreement. When you revoked that license, you were simply locking the door to your own private property. I let out a slow breath. "Donovan threatened to have me arrested for corporate sabotage," I said, remembering the red-faced executive shouting at me in the office. "He told my brother-in-law I'd be sent to federal prison." Harrison dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "Donovan is a classic corporate bully used to intimidating junior employees with empty threats. Corporate sabotage implies you destroyed their proprietary property. But you didn't destroy anything. You simply stopped giving them yours for free. No judge in this country is going to prosecute you for locking your own front door." The server arrived, set down 2 cups of black coffee, and quietly stepped away. Harrison leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Claire, the real issue isn't what you did to them. The real issue is what they are currently trying to do to you." He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a manila folder, placing it squarely between us. I've been monitoring the backend's server logs for the Nexus system ever since you initiated the lockout, Harrison explained. Apex is losing millions today. Torch. Their board is completely panicked, and Vanguard Logistics is threatening to pull their account. In their desperate rush to get the system back online, Donovan and your dear brother-in-law authorized their IT department to force their way into your software. I stared at him, my heart skipping a beat. They tried to hack the system? Torch. They are actively attempting to bypass your encryption firewalls, Harrison confirmed, tapping a finger against a printout showing thousands of failed login attempts originating from Apex IP addresses. They're running brute force programs to crack your admin password. Torch. They think if they can break in and copy the source code, they can regain control of the freight network and pretend you gave them access. A cold smile spread across my face. My toxic family and my arrogant boss were so blinded by their own sense of entitlement that they were walking straight into a massive legal trap. They have no idea what they're doing, I whispered. Torch. Exactly, Harrison grinned, his eyes gleaming with the excitement of a legal hunt. By actively trying to breach your private servers, Apex is no longer just violating a software license. They are committing a federal crime under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. They are actively engaging in federal copyright infringement. You haven't broken the law. They have. Torch. Harrison paused, letting the weight of that reality settle in. He leaned back in his leather seat, his triumphant excitement fading into a heavy, serious tone. He reached into his briefcase once more and pulled out a thick black folder sealed with a security tag. He placed it carefully on the tablecloth, handling it as if it were a loaded weapon. We have an even bigger issue, Harrison said. Torch. Yesterday, while monitoring the brute force attacks, I ran a forensic diagnostic on the server logs you secured before leaving Apex. I wanted to ensure we had a perfect, untampered snapshot of the entire operational history, just in case Donovan tried to alter data against you. I stared at the black folder, my mouth suddenly dry. Torch. A chill ran up my spine that had nothing to do with the restaurant's air conditioning. What did you find? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Harrison broke the security seal and opened the folder. He slid a stack of dense financial routing logs covered in yellow highlights across the table. I looked down at the numbers. Torch. At first glance, it looked like standard freight billing data, but as my eyes adjusted to the columns, I realized I was looking at something else entirely. These were shadow transactions. They were buried deep within the automated billing cycles for Vanguard Logistics, our largest, most profitable account. Torch. Your brother-in-law wasn't just stealing credit for your late nights and your brilliant spreadsheets, Harrison explained, pointing his pen at a specific set of highlighted numbers. Marcus has been very busy over the last 6 months. He's been quietly embedding phantom invoices into Vanguard's supply chain. Torch. Every time your software successfully routed a massive shipment and generated an invoice, Marcus manually intercepted the billing process on the back end. He skimmed microcents off single shipping costs and redirected those hidden margins. I felt the color drain from my face. I grabbed the documents and pulled them closer, the numbers dancing before my eyes. Marcus was embezzling money. Torch. The golden boy of the family, the man who constantly demanded respect and obedience, was a thief, and he wasn't stealing small amounts either. The massive volume of freight Vanguard moved every single day meant those tiny microcents added up to an astronomical sum. Torch. He's been siphoning the money into a holding account hidden inside Apex's corporate structure, Harrison continued, his voice cold and precise. Over the past 6 months, he has accumulated exactly $1.2 million. That money is currently sitting in a digital vault, waiting to be moved out of the company. My hands began to tremble. $1.2 million. Torch. If Vanguard Logistics discovered this massive theft, they wouldn't just cancel their contract. They would destroy Apex. They would launch a federal investigation, and anyone involved in managing that account would face intense scrutiny. including me. Where was the money supposed to go? I demanded, my mind racing through the disastrous consequences. That's the most sinister part, Harrison said. George. I traced the destination code attached to that digital vault. It's a one-way routing sequence programmed to dump the entire $1.2 million into an untraceable offshore account in the Cayman Islands. But he hasn't been able to execute the final transfer. Why not? I asked, staring at the damning evidence. Because he lacked sufficient executive security clearance, Harrison answered. George. Which brings us to the real reason you were denied that promotion on Monday morning. The truth hit me with the force of a speeding freight train. The glass conference room. Donovan throwing my flawless performance review aside. Marcus clicking his Mont Blanc pen with a smirk on his face. My mother's phone call the night before, aggressively demanding I step aside for the good of the family. George. All the puzzle pieces reshuffled into a brand new, terrifying picture. Marcus didn't care about the prestige of the senior director title. He didn't care about the corner office or the pay raise to buy Chloe her dream house in the suburbs. He needed that promotion because the senior director of operations title came with level 5 executive security clearance. George. He needed that specific admin access to bypass the final financial firewall and wire the embezzled $1.2 million to his offshore account. And that wasn't even the darkest part of his plan. Harrison leaned forward, locking his eyes onto mine. He knew the missing funds would eventually get flagged during the company's annual audit. He needed a scapegoat. George. He needed a catastrophic system failure to cover his tracks, and he needed a target to take the entire fall. I stared at the documents on the table in absolute horror. He was planning to frame me. Harrison nodded slowly. Once he got the promotion and moved the money, he planned to trigger a system crash inside your proprietary routing software. George. He was going to use his new admin access to inject malicious code into Vanguard's billing grid. He planned to create a massive financial loophole and point the finger directly at the original developer of the system. My breath caught in my throat. My family had colluded to hand my career over to a man who was actively planning to send me to prison. George. My mother had pushed me off the cliff just to protect a criminal, and Marcus had sat in my living room yesterday, holding my pregnant sister and playing the victim, while secretly trying to destroy my entire life. You were meant to be the sacrificial lamb? Harrison stated softly. When the auditors discovered the missing money, Marcus would testify in court that your software glitched. George. You would have been left facing federal charges completely alone. The sheer scale of his evil scheme finally crystallized in my mind. My unexpected resignation had trapped him. By logging off and revoking the license, I had frozen his money and cut off his escape route. Marcus hadn't been panicking in my apartment yesterday about a frozen logistics network. George. He was terrified that without me there to take the fall, he was facing decades in federal prison. The revelation hung in the air of the high-end steakhouse like a heavy, suffocating cloud. I sat motionless, staring at the financial logs on the table. My own brother-in-law had planned to use my life to pay for his greed, and my mother had been his accomplice all along. George. A sharp vibration broke the heavy silence. My smartphone buzzed against the white tablecloth. I looked down to see a new notification lighting up the screen, a high-priority email forwarded from my private inbox. The sender was Donovan. The subject line was typed entirely in capital letters, demanding my immediate attention. Urgent. Mandatory board meeting attendance. George. I unlocked the screen and opened the message. Harrison leaned forward, his professional curiosity piqued, watching my eyes scan the text. The email was a masterpiece of corporate intimidation. It abandoned any pretense of professional etiquette. Donovan had bypassed standard HR procedures and gone straight for the throat, issuing orders in a cold corporate tone. George. Claire, he wrote, given the destructive nature of your unauthorized departure and the resulting total collapse of our operational network, I am formally requiring your presence at an emergency executive board meeting tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock. You will report directly to the main glass conference room. Do not be late. George. I read the next paragraph out loud so Harrison could hear the desperation leaking through Donovan's aggressive phrasing. We are facing an unprecedented loss of clients. I read, keeping my voice steady. Mr. Maxwell, the CEO of Vanguard Logistics, is currently flying to Chicago on his private jet to handle this network disruption personally. He will be attending the meeting tomorrow morning. George. Apex Tech Solutions cannot tolerate any further delays. I scrolled down to the final paragraph. This was where Donovan laid out his ultimatum. We are offering you a one-time resolution to mitigate the damage you have caused. You will arrive tomorrow morning with your laptop. You will immediately restore full operational access to the routing software. George. Furthermore, you will sign a legally binding IP transfer agreement surrendering any claims your private entity holds over the system architecture. You will turn the code over to Apex Tech Solutions entirely. If you comply with these terms, we are willing to handle the fallout of your sudden departure and network disruption internally. George. If you fail to attend or refuse to sign the transfer documents, we will immediately contact federal authorities. We will pursue maximum charges for commercial espionage, theft of company property, and intentional sabotage. We have the legal resources to ensure you spend the foreseeable future behind bars. The choice is yours. I finished reading and slid the phone across the table to Harrison. George. He picked it up, adjusted his reading glasses, and quickly scanned the text. Instead of looking worried, a predator's smile bloomed across Harrison's face. He let out a soft laugh and shook his head in disbelief. This is absolutely incredible, Harrison said, tapping the phone screen with his index finger. Donovan has no idea about the embezzlement. George. He thinks this is just a disgruntled former employee holding a software license hostage. He has no clue that his newly appointed senior director is actively trying to rob his largest client. And to make things even better, Donovan just put his attempt at extortion in writing. I looked at the digital threat. George. Donovan was trying to force my compliance by using my freedom as bait, naively assuming I would be terrified of a police investigation. He thought I would run back to the office, hand over millions of dollars in software, and beg for mercy just to avoid a fabricated criminal charge. He thought I was weak, believing the combined pressure of an angry CEO and a corporate legal team would break me. George. He's using Vanguard Logistics as a weapon to intimidate me, I pointed out, leaning back into the leather booth. Donovan wants me to walk into that room and face CEO Maxwell's anger alone. He wants me to take the blame for the network shutdown in front of the client. George. Then, once I sign the software transfer out of sheer panic, Marcus can use his new security clearance to quietly finalize the transfer of that stolen $1.2 million. They get the software, Marcus gets the money, and I'm left with a ruined reputation. Harrison closed the black folder containing the embezzlement evidence and handed it to me. George. They've set a trap, he agreed, but it's built entirely on their own ignorance. They don't realize you have the server logs. They don't realize we know about the offshore account, and they certainly don't realize that this extortion email is the final piece of evidence we need to prove. Donovan is guilty of gross managerial negligence. I carefully placed the folder into my designer tote bag. George. The documents felt heavy, packed with enough power to destroy multiple careers and completely shatter my toxic family. Tomorrow morning is going to be a bloodbath, I said softly. Harrison signaled the server for the check. It's going to be an execution, he corrected me. We're going to let them set the stage. George. We'll let Donovan make his demands, and we'll let Marcus sit there in his expensive suit thinking he's won. And then we bring down the hammer. But Claire, you need to be mentally prepared. When we walk into that conference room tomorrow morning, there is no turning back. You will completely destroy your brother-in-law in front of his employer and his most profitable client. Orch. The fallout will hit your family like a tsunami. Are you fully prepared to handle that collateral damage? I grabbed my bag and smiled. I crossed that line 3 days ago. I left the steakhouse carrying the black folder filled with damning evidence. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Chicago streets as I hailed a cab back to my apartment. Orch. The adrenaline from my meeting with Harrison surged through my veins, sharp and electric. I needed to prepare. I needed to build the gallows myself. When I opened the front door and stepped into my quiet living room, my smartphone vibrated in my pocket. The screen showed an incoming call from my father, Arthur. I almost declined it, but a morbid curiosity drove me to answer. Orch. I slid the green icon and brought the phone to my ear. I didn't say hello, I just waited. Claire, sweetheart? Arthur began, his voice dripping with an artificial warmth I hadn't heard since I was a little girl. It was the exact tone he used when trying to talk an impossible client into signing a terrible contract. I'm so glad you picked up, Orch. Your mother and I have been sick with worry about you. We know tempers were high this morning, but we want to help you fix this before it gets completely out of hand. I walked into the kitchen, set my bag on the counter, and stayed completely silent. Listen to me, Arthur continued, lowering his voice to play the role of the deeply concerned patriarch. Orch. Donovan is furious, but he's a reasonable man. Marcus spent all afternoon pleading with him on your behalf. If you go into the office tomorrow morning, apologize for your emotional outburst, and hand the admin password over to Marcus, this whole thing blows over. Marcus is even willing to talk to HR about getting you rehired as his assistant. You keep your benefits, Claire. Do the right thing. Orch. Don't ruin your sister's life over a moment of personal pride. The sheer arrogance of his offer was breathtaking. He actually expected me to bow down to a man who was actively trying to set me up for a federal prison sentence, just so I could go back to being his subordinate. Arthur was trying to wrap a corporate execution in a warm, cozy blanket called family loyalty. Orch. You're asking me to hand over my private company so Marcus can make his mortgage payments in the suburbs, I stated flatly. I am asking you to be a decent sister, Arthur snapped, his fake gentle tone cracking for a second before he caught himself. Claire, please, don't force us to watch you ruin your own life. I'm not ruining my life, I replied, completely devoid of emotion. Orch. I'm ruining his. I pulled the phone away from my ear, ignoring my father's sudden gasp, and pressed the red end call button. Without a second thought, I navigated to his contact profile, scrolled to the bottom, and tapped Block this caller. I did the exact same thing to Eleanor, Chloe, and Marcus. The lines of communication to my toxic family were officially and permanently severed. Orch. I was done listening to their manipulative lies. I turned my attention to the dining table, setting down a heavy-duty binder I had picked up on the drive home. I connected my laptop to a high-speed laser printer and opened my encrypted files. As the night grew dark outside, I began assembling the gallows. I printed 500 pages of indisputable, brutal evidence. Orch. The printer hummed for hours, spitting out stack after stack of documentation. I started with the intellectual property certificates, placing the federal copyright registrations into the front plastic sleeves. Next came the software license agreement, with the termination clause I had legally executed, highlighted in bright yellow. Then, I moved on to the dark truth Harrison had uncovered. Orch. I printed the shadow transaction logs showing how Marcus had spent the last 6 months skimming fractions of a cent off Vanguard's invoices. I printed the digital signature verifications linking those specific terminal commands directly to Marcus's corporate credentials. Orch. Finally, I printed the destination routing codes, clearly showing the offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands, waiting to receive the stolen $1.2 million. I organized every section with color-coded tabs, weaving an inescapable chain of accountability. Fraud, gross managerial negligence, and intellectual property theft. Orch. It was past midnight when I snapped the heavy metal rings of the binder shut. The thick black binder weighed nearly 10 pounds. The physical manifestation of my vindication. Before sunrise, there was only one task left to complete. I opened a secure browser window, bypassing standard corporate directories. Using a backdoor contact registry I kept for server emergencies, I pulled up a high-level private line. It was the personal phone number for Mr. Maxwell, the CEO of Vanguard Logistics. I knew Maxwell was currently staying in a luxury downtown hotel suite, having flown in on his private jet to handle the chaos at Apex. I dialed the number. After 2 rings, a deep, authoritative voice answered. Maxwell here. Mr. Maxwell, I said, keeping my tone crisp and professional. My name is Claire. I am the sole owner and developer of this Nexus routing architecture, the software currently managing your entire supply chain. There was a sharp silence on the line. The CEO was listening. I have been scheduled to attend an emergency board meeting with Donovan at 8 tomorrow morning, I continued. I am calling you tonight to let you know that the current network outage isn't a glitch. It was a manual shutdown on my end to stop a massive internal financial theft targeting your account. I have hard evidence. I'll see you in the conference room tomorrow morning. The morning air was crisp as I stepped out of my car and walked toward the towering glass facade of the Apex Tech Solutions building. My left hand gripped the 10-pound black binder, which felt like a heavy, solid brick of absolute justice. I swiped my temporary visitor pass at the front security desk. The guard, a man who had greeted me every morning for 3 years, stared at me with wide eyes. He had clearly heard the rumors. The entire corporate campus was buzzing with a frantic, nervous energy. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the executive floor, catching my reflection in the polished metal doors. Wearing a sharp, dark gray suit and black heels, I didn't look like a defeated employee coming to beg for her job. I looked like a corporate executioner. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. I walked down the carpeted hallway, heading straight for the main glass conference room. Even from a distance I could see them gathered inside. The tension in that room was almost visible, radiating right through the clear glass walls. I pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped into the lion's den. The atmosphere hit me instantly, thick with hostility and suffocating arrogance. Seated around the long mahogany table were the most powerful people in the company. Vice President Donovan sat near the head of the table, his face flushed red, radiating an aggressive energy that proved he believed he held all the cards. Flanking him were 3 men in identical dark suits. Apex's corporate legal team. Their legal pads were open, and their pens were hovering, ready to draft the terms of my unconditional surrender. Several board members sat along the sides, glaring at me with pure contempt. In their eyes, I was just a rogue worker, whose emotional breakdown had caused a massive financial headache. They thought they were about to witness my destruction. They expected tears and pleas for mercy, waiting for Donovan to rip my career to pieces. And then, there was Marcus. My brother-in-law sat directly across from Donovan, practically vibrating with smug satisfaction. He was wearing a brand new, impeccably tailored navy suit that looked ridiculously expensive. He had clearly spent his weekend shopping, blowing money he assumed he'd be making, after stealing my promotion. He leaned back in his leather chair, ankles crossed, holding a ceramic coffee mug in one hand and his $500 Mont Blanc pen in the other. Click, click. He clicked the pen twice. It was the exact same pen he had clicked when he stole my job in that very room. As I walked in, his eyes locked onto mine, and he let out a subtle, condescending scoff. He offered me a slow, triumphant smirk, truly believing he had backed me into a corner. Marcus thought my presence meant I had caved to my father's manipulation and Donovan's legal threats. He assumed my bag held my private laptop, ready to be plugged in to restore the routing network, and sign away my intellectual property rights just to stay out of federal prison. He thought he was about to play the hero who saved the Vanguard account, while I would be demoted back to being his quiet, obedient assistant. The absolute delusion radiating off him was almost impressive. Which? He looked at my black binder, assuming it held a typed apology or a desperate list of demands. He had no idea his entire future was printed on those 500 pages. He had no idea his offshore account number was sitting right inside that black cover, waiting to be exposed. Donovan cleared his throat loudly, demanding silence. The hushed whispers stopped instantly. Arch. He pointed to an empty chair at the far end of the table, the seat traditionally reserved for subordinates, facing severe disciplinary action. It was a position meant to make whoever sat there feel small and outnumbered. "Sit down," Donovan commanded, his tone cold and non-negotiable. "We have a massive operational crisis to resolve, and my patience is completely exhausted. Arch, you've caused incredible damage to this organization, and we are going to fix it right now." The corporate lawyers stared at me like predators. Board members shifted in their seats, arms crossed, waiting for the execution to begin. Markix took a slow sip of coffee, smugly waiting for me to pull out the chair and submit to their authority. Arch. He even gave me a slight nod, urging me to obey the man threatening my freedom. I didn't walk toward the empty chair. I didn't break eye contact with Donovan, and I didn't show a single trace of fear. Instead, I took firm, steady steps directly toward the head of the conference table. The sharp click of my heels against the floor disrupted their carefully planned intimidation tactics. Arch. I stopped right next to the empty seat reserved for the CEO of Vanguard Logistics and slammed my heavy black binder onto the polished mahogany table. The loud thud echoed in the dead silent room, making one of the lawyers flinch in his seat. "I won't be sitting down," I stated, my voice carrying total authority. "And I am not here to negotiate terms of surrender." Arch. I stood at the head of the long table, looking down at the men who had planned to ruin my life. The room fell dead silent as they realized I wasn't the victim they had expected to see today. Donovan stared at me, his facial muscles twisting with raw, unfiltered rage. He had expected a cowering, defeated woman who would quietly take her seat and beg to keep her job. Arch. My refusal to play the submissive role completely shattered his illusion of control. He slammed his hands flat onto the table, pushing himself up to loom over me. "You listen to me, Claire!" Donovan bellowed, his voice rattling the glass walls. "You don't call the shots in this room. You don't get to walk in here and play the rebellious hero. Arch. You are nothing more than a bitter, unprofessional former employee who threw a massive emotional tantrum because you couldn't handle constructive criticism." I kept my expression completely neutral, letting him waste his breath. Marcus leaned back, a smug smirk plastered across his face, thoroughly enjoying watching the vice president do his dirty work. Arch. The three lawyers hovered on either side of Donovan like trained attack dogs, waiting for me to break. "Not only are you unprofessional," Donovan continued to rage, "you are a thief. You deliberately sabotaged our proprietary systems. You launched a cyber attack against this company simply because you were jealous of your brother-in-law. Arch. You stole corporate assets and locked us out of the logistics grid, causing a massive financial hemorrhage. Your little stunt has cost Apex millions of dollars in just 3 days." He was projecting his own incompetence onto me, twisting the facts to fit the lie he had sold to the board. He desperately needed me to be the unstable villain to cover up his own catastrophic management failure. Arch. He needed a scapegoat for promoting a fraud who couldn't even restart a server. I didn't interrupt him. I let every word he spoke dig his grave a little deeper. Donovan reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, and slammed them onto the table. Arch. He shoved them across the polished wood, the heavy papers sliding smoothly until they stopped just inches from my hand. Then, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a silver pen, and tossed it onto the stack. It landed with a sharp clatter in the quiet room. "That is a non-disclosure agreement and an IP transfer agreement." Donovan said coldly, his tone shifting to outright extortion. Orch. It clearly states that you admit your actions were illegal, and it transfers full ownership of the routing software directly to Apex. It strips you of any independent rights or future royalties to that back-end architecture. Furthermore, it includes a strict gag order, prohibiting you from discussing this with anyone outside this room. I glanced down at the document. Orch. The sheer arrogance of his demand was laughable. He was trying to intimidate me into handing over a multi-million-dollar asset for absolutely nothing in return. Sign it. Fix the network and we won't have you arrested, Donovan demanded. That is the only deal you are getting today. Orch. You will plug your laptop into our mainframe right now, restore full admin access to Marcus, and once the Vanguard account stabilizes, we will decline to press federal criminal charges. We'll let you walk away with a clean record. If you refuse, I have the police waiting outside. You'll be escorted out of this lobby in handcuffs. Marcus leaned forward. Orch. Just sign it, Claire, he urged with fake sympathy. Donovan is being remarkably generous. Don't make this worse than it already is. Think about the family. Think about how broken Mom and Dad will be if they see your mugshot on the evening news. Hand over the software and go home. The lawyers locked their eyes on me, fully expecting me to reach for the silver pen. Orch. They assumed the threat of prison would overpower my common sense, believing the psychological weight of this ambush would force a total surrender. I looked down at the silver pen. I didn't touch it, and I didn't reach out. Orch. Instead, I grabbed the massive black binder I had brought with me, lifted it high, and slammed it squarely down onto the center of the mahogany table, right on top of Donovan's absurd legal contract. The deafening thud of the binder echoed through the room like a judge's gavel coming down. The sheer weight of my evidence crushed the NDA beneath it, sending the silver pen rattling onto the floor. Orch. I placed both hands flat on the black binder, leaning forward to mirror Donovan's aggressive posture. I stared right into his eyes, watching his confident smirk flicker for the first time. He stared at the thick binder, a sudden flash of uncertainty crossing his face. You seem to be living in a massive delusion, Donovan, I said, my voice low yet carrying clearly across the room. Orch. You seem to think you hold the power in this room, that you occupy the legal high ground, and that you can threaten me with federal prison simply because I walked away with my own private property. Donovan opened his mouth to shout another threat, but I cut him off instantly. I am not signing your IP transfer agreement, I stated firmly. I am not restoring your network access. Orch. I am not helping Marcus solve a crisis he is too incompetent to understand, and I am certainly not going to sit here and let you call me a thief, while the actual criminal is sitting right across from you, wearing a custom suit bought with stolen money. Marcus's smug smile vanished in an instant, the color draining from his face as he gripped the armrests of his chair. Orch. I opened the thick black binder, pulled out color-coded documents, and walked deliberately around the massive mahogany table. I handed a thick stack to Donovan and slid identical copies directly in front of each corporate lawyer. They stopped glaring at me and began to read, the room falling quiet save for the rustle of turning pages. Look at page 1, I instructed calmly. Orch. That is the federal copyright registration for the underlying architecture of the routing software you are currently trying to hack into. It was filed 3 years ago. Look at page 2. That is the official patent filing registered under Nexus Freight Dynamics, a private LLC where I am listed as the sole owner and CEO. Orch. Donovan stared at the paper, blinking frantically as he struggled to process the legal terms. He looked up at me, his face twisted in a mix of confusion and anger. What is this nonsense? Donovan demanded. You worked for us. We own everything you created. I shook my head slowly. Turn to page 5, Donovan, I said. That is my original employment contract with Apex. Orch. You'll notice my role was strictly defined as a data analyst. My contract contains 0 provisions for software development, no clauses requiring me to write proprietary systems, and absolutely no IP assignment terms, claiming secondary work created outside my contracted hours. I pointed to a highlighted section. Torch. I built that routing system in my own apartment, on my personal computer, using private resources, simply because your legacy system was a prehistoric mess. Out of professional courtesy, I granted Apex a free, revocable end-user license agreement to streamline operations. Your company never paid me a single cent for that development, and you never offered a buyout. Torch. You simply took the results and handed the credit to Marcus. Marcus swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically toward the legal team, desperately looking for someone to save him. The three men in dark suits were no longer looking at me with predatory confidence. Fear was steadily building on their faces as they read through the pages. Torch. The head legal officer ran his finger down the IP certificates, verifying the federal registration numbers. Because you never paid for it, I continued, that license was always conditional. When you handed the promotion I earned to a man who can't even write a basic macro, I exercised my legal right to terminate your access. I didn't steal a thing. I simply locked the door to my own property. Torch. Your current operational crisis is not my responsibility. It is the direct result of relying entirely on a system you never owned, managed by someone with zero operational capability. Donovan turned to his chief legal counsel, pale and sweating profusely. Tell me she's bluffing, Donovan ordered, his voice cracking. Torch. Tell me this is just a bunch of fake internet paper and that we can arrest her right now. The lead attorney didn't answer. He flipped back to the first page, scanning the federal seal. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, opened a legal database app, and typed in the patent registration numbers. The entire conference room waited in agonizing suspense, the long silence growing unbearable. Torch. Finally, the lead attorney looked up, staring straight at Donovan. The color had completely drained from his face. He leaned in close to whisper, but the room was so quiet his words carried clearly across the mahogany table. The documentation is airtight, the lawyer whispered, his voice trembling as he realized the catastrophic mistake they had made. Torch. The patents are real, and the copyrights are federally registered. All the source code outright. We have zero legal claim to this software. None at all. Donovan looked like he had been struck by lightning, his jaw dropping, as the aggressive bully mask he had worn just 5 minutes ago completely evaporated. He stared at me, his eyes filled with newfound fear. Torch. And that's not even the worst part. The lead attorney continued, his voice growing more frantic. Look at page 12. I guided them to the final section, and the lawyer flipped to the page, letting out a sharp gasp. Torch. By authorizing your IT department to run brute force attacks against my private servers over the last 72 hours, I explained. You have been actively engaging in unauthorized network intrusion. You attempted to hack a private corporate entity, which is a direct violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. You are currently committing federal crimes. Torch. All three lawyers immediately pulled out their phones, frantically texting the IT department to cease all operations, dropping into full panic mode. Donovan collapsed back into his chair, looking physically ill. Claire, he stammered, his voice weak and completely broken. Claire, we can work this out. We can write you a check right now to buy the software. Name your price. Torch. We'll give you the senior director position, and we'll fire Marcus today. Just turn the network back on before the Vanguard people get here. Please. I looked at Donovan, then over at Marcus, who was visibly shaking in his expensive suit. The reversal of power was absolute. They had tried to trap me, only to lock themselves inside a burning building. Torch. I didn't touch their absurd NDA, and I didn't smile. I'm not here to get my job back, I stated, my voice echoing with devastating finality. I don't want the senior director title. I don't want a quick settlement check, and I am definitely not turning your network back on. Torch. I placed both hands flat on the table and leaned in, making sure every single person in the room heard my next words clearly. I am here to formally serve Apex Tech Solutions with a $5 million lawsuit for intellectual property infringement, unauthorized system intrusion, and corporate harassment. Gasp echoed through the room. Porch. One panicked board member dropped his coffee cup, sending dark liquid spreading across the polished wood, while Donovan buried his face in his hands. I stood tall, thoroughly enjoying their total downfall. The $5 million claim hung over the executives like a physical weight. Nobody moved, and nobody dared to breathe. Porch. The lead attorney kept staring at the copyright documents as if praying the ink would magically disappear, while Donovan sat frozen with his face buried in his trembling hands, completely broken by the reality of his failure. Marcus, however, couldn't handle the silence. Porch. He couldn't accept that his carefully constructed house of cards had just been flattened by the very woman he had treated like an obedient servant for years. The fear that had paralyzed him moments ago suddenly mutated into wild, uncontrollable rage. He shoved his heavy leather chair back so violently that it toppled over, slamming against the glass wall behind him with a loud crash. Porch. Marcus stood up, his expensive new suit jacket looking absurd against his heaving chest. He slammed both fists onto the mahogany table, making the scattered legal papers jump. "You're a liar!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. He pointed a trembling finger straight at my face. "You are an absolute liar, Claire. Don't listen to a single word she says, Donovan." Porch. "She's manipulating all of you. She didn't shut down the network because of some intellectual property dispute. That's just a smokescreen." Breathing heavily, Marcus scanned the room with wild eyes, desperately trying to pull the board members back to his side. The executives looked up, thoroughly confused by his sudden outburst. I stood perfectly still, watching him build his own trap. Porch. He was about to play what he thought was his ultimate trump card, completely unaware that I already held the entire deck. "She crashed the routing software to cover up her own crimes," Marcus shouted, leaning across the table toward me before turning his frantic gaze to the legal team. "She's a criminal." Porch. "For the past 6 months, she's been siphoning funds directly out of the Vanguard Logistics account. I discovered the discrepancies in the billing logs on Friday. That's why I took the promotion. That's why I needed executive security clearance. I was building a case against her." Porch. "She stole over $1 million from our largest client, and when she realized I was about to expose her, she locked the entire system to destroy the evidence. She's trying to extort us for $5 million to cover up her own embezzlement. Don't let her walk out of this building. Call the police and have her arrested for grand theft right now." Porch. A wave of chaotic whispers broke out in the conference room as several board members gasped and leaned in to talk among themselves. Donovan lifted his head from his hands, a desperate spark of hope suddenly igniting in his eyes. He wanted so badly to believe Marcus, desperate for a scapegoat to the point where he was willing to accept this absurd, fabricated story without a shred of proof. "Porch. You've been stealing from Vanguard?" Donovan demanded, his voice wavering between anger and sheer relief. "If this is true, Claire, you will never see the light of day again. I didn't defend myself, I didn't shout back, and I didn't bother denying his ridiculous accusation. I simply maintained a cold, steady gaze, staring directly at Marcus." Porch. As he caught his breath, a smug smirk slowly crept back onto his face. He thought he had outsmarted me, believing his quick thinking had successfully shifted the target onto my back. He actually believed his lies would save him from federal prison. I glanced at the digital clock on the conference room wall. It was exactly 8:15 a.m. The timing was absolute perfection. Porch. Before Donovan could order his lawyers to call the police, the heavy glass doors of the conference room swept open with a sharp, commanding swoosh. The sudden movement silenced the room instantly, forcing everyone to turn toward the entrance. Mr. Maxwell, the CEO of Vanguard Logistics, stepped across the threshold. A tall, imposing man in his late 50s, dressed in a dark gray suit, He radiated total authority. He didn't look like a man panicking over a frozen supply chain. He looked like an executioner arriving to oversee an execution. Walking right beside him was my attorney, Harrison, holding his leather briefcase with a thoroughly satisfied smile on his face. Orch. The dynamic in the room shifted so violently it felt like a sudden drop in air pressure. Donovan scrambled up from his chair, nearly tripping over his own feet in his rush to greet the most important client in Apex's history. "Mr. Maxwell," Donovan stammered, adjusting his tie and forcing a bright, flattering smile onto his pale face. "Thank goodness you arrived early. Orch, please, come in, have a seat. We were just diving deep into this unfortunate network glitch. I assure you, we have identified the rogue employee responsible for this disruption, and we are handling it with the utmost severity." Donovan practically lunged forward, extending his right hand to welcome the billionaire executive, expecting a firm handshake and a moment of corporate solidarity. Orch. CEO Maxwell didn't offer his hand. He didn't even slow his pace. He walked right past Donovan, completely ignoring the extended hand and leaving the vice president standing awkwardly in the middle of the room. Maxwell didn't look at the board members, and he didn't look at the legal team. His cold, furious gaze bypassed everyone and locked directly onto Marcus. Orch. Marcus's smirk vanished in an instant. The fake confidence melted right off his face, replaced by a sudden, creeping terror as Maxwell approached him with pure disgust. Marcus took a step back, hitting the glass wall. Orch. Everyone in the room held their breath, waiting for the storm to break as the most powerful man in the logistics industry stared down a thief who had just signed his own death warrant. It was time to show him a real corporate execution. Everything was unfolding exactly according to plan. The stage was set, and the scene for his absolute destruction was underway. Orch. CEO Maxwell stood just inches from Marcus, the quiet, dangerous fury radiating off him, completely paralyzing the newly appointed executive. The silence in the conference room was absolute. Nobody dared to breathe. Harrison broke the tension, walking briskly past the frozen legal team, straight to the central multimedia console. Orch. He pulled a sleek black tablet from his leather briefcase and plugged a high-speed cable directly into the main projector hub. The massive screen at the front of the mahogany table lit up instantly, its bright light sweeping over the terrified faces of the board members. "Gentlemen," Harrison began, his voice commanding the absolute attention of everyone in the room. "Orch. My client, Claire, did not hack your system. She did not sabotage your network to cover up financial crimes, nor is she an employee throwing a tantrum. In fact, my client is the sole reason none of you are currently facing federal charges for severe corporate negligence." Harrison tapped the tablet screen. An immensely complex, highly detailed spreadsheet appeared on the projector. Orch. It was the exact same document I had shown him at the steakhouse, but now it was blown up for the entire executive board to see, clearly displaying Vanguard Logistics' massive billing grid. "Mr. Orch, Maxwell hired us to conduct a covert, independent forensic audit of his company's freight invoices," Harrison explained smoothly, weaving our carefully constructed narrative to protect my intellectual property while exposing the real criminal. Orch. During that audit, we discovered a highly sophisticated, deeply buried algorithm that has been consistently skimming microcents off every single Vanguard freight transaction for the past 6 months. Donovan's face turned deathly pale. He looked at the screen, then at me, and finally at Marcus, who was currently leaning against the glass wall, shaking violently. Orch. The Apex lawyers scrambled to open their laptops, desperately trying to log into their internal audit software to verify Harrison's shocking claim. Harrison tapped the tablet again, switching the display to a new document. Orch. It showed a digital holding vault containing exactly $1.2 million, alongside a scheduled wire transfer protocol pointing directly to an untraceable offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands. This thief successfully accumulated over $1 million. Harrison continued, his tone sharp and relentless. However, they ran into a major logistical problem. Without Level 5 executive security clearance, they couldn't authorize the final offshore transfer. They needed a massive promotion to pull off the heist. Harrison slid smoothly to the final slide. It was a digital access log from late Friday night, stamped with a precise timestamp. It showed a successful login attempt into the master financial routing terminal. Right next to the timestamp was a glaring, unmistakable digital signature, a unique alphanumeric code tied directly to a specific corporate identity. This is the access log showing the exact moment the final transfer sequence was initiated, Harrison announced, pointing his pen at the screen. And as you can clearly see, that digital signature belongs to the newly promoted Senior Director of Operations, Marcus. A wave of chaotic gasps erupted across the room. Donovan stumbled backward, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He stared at Marcus with a mix of deep shock and sheer horror. The vice president finally realized he had personally handed the keys to the corporate vault to an active embezzler. He had promoted a thief, while simultaneously threatening to send the actual software developer to federal prison. Marcus opened his mouth to deny it, but no sound came out. His chest heaved as he frantically searched the room for a friendly face, finding none. Maxwell stood with his arms crossed tightly, glaring at him with pure disgust, while the legal team immediately pushed their chairs back from the table, physically distancing themselves from the exposed criminal to avoid any suspicion of conspiracy. As the reality of the situation crushed the executives, a sudden movement outside the glass walls caught my attention. The main lobby elevators sounded a sharp chime as the doors slid open in unison. 6 people stepped out onto the executive floor, looking nothing like corporate clients or standard office visitors. Wearing crisp windbreakers and heavy tactical belts, they moved with coordinated tactical precision straight toward the glass conference room. The man in the lead held up a badge, pressing the golden shield flat against the transparent glass so everyone inside could see it clearly. Detectives from the white-collar crime unit. They had arrived right on schedule, summoned after Harrison secretly forwarded the evidence to federal authorities the night before. The appearance of those badges completely shattered the last remnants of Marcus's arrogant facade. The brutal reality of his impending arrest hit him with devastating force. He realized his perfect plan had completely failed. He wasn't getting the money, he wasn't keeping the title, and he was never going back to his comfortable suburban life. Marcus's knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the carpeted floor, his expensive, new custom suit bunching up awkwardly around his shaking shoulders. The man who had strutted into the room like a king just moments ago was instantly reduced to a sobbing, pitiful wreck. He buried his face in his hands, weeping openly on the expensive carpet as the harsh truth of his future finally settled over him. He lifted his head from the floor, tears streaming down his face, his eyes wide and bloodshot with absolute terror. Crawling forward on his hands and knees, he stumbled toward where I stood at the end of the mahogany table. "Please," Marcus begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical wail. "Please, Claire, you have to make them stop. You have to help me. We're family." "Please, Claire, think about Chloe. She's pregnant. She's having a baby. You can't let them take me away." I looked down at him, ice water running through my veins. "Where you're going, Marcus, you won't be needing executive vision." Before my final words could even settle in the tense air, the heavy glass door was shoved wide open. The lead detective stepped across the threshold with absolute authority, his golden badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. 2 uniformed officers followed right behind him, their expressions completely devoid of sympathy. They bypassed the stunned legal team, walked straight past the trembling Donovan, and stopped directly behind Marcus. "Stand up," the lead detective commanded, his voice echoing in the enclosed space. Marcus remained on the floor, face buried in his hands, crying uncontrollably on the expensive carpet. He didn't move, completely paralyzed by the sudden brutal collision between his actions and their consequences. Orch. One of the uniformed officers bent down, grabbed the lapels of Marcus's new suit jacket, and forcibly yanked him to his feet. Marcus stumbled, his legs barely able to support his weight. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," the officer instructed, spinning Marcus around. The sound that followed was sharp and metallic. Orch. Heavy steel handcuffs clicked securely around Marcus's wrists, locking his arms tightly behind his back. That crisp mechanical sound seemed to break a spell in the room. The lawyers gasped in unison, while Donovan pressed himself deep into his leather chair, desperately trying to distance himself from the criminal he had personally backed just days ago. "Orch. Please," Marcus pleaded, twisting his head to look at the board members. "I can explain the discrepancies. I can fix the routing logs. It was just a temporary holding account. You have the right to remain silent," the detective recited loudly, cutting off Marcus's pitiful attempt to justify his embezzlement. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Orch. As the detective finished reading the Miranda rights, the officers turned Marcus toward the exit. This exact moment was what I had anticipated with crystal clear foresight. The officers escorted Marcus out of the glass conference room and directly into the open office layout of the operations floor. The entire company had stopped working. Orch. Hundreds of employees had abandoned their cubicles, crowding the main aisle. It was the exact same crowd that had stood in stunned silence 3 days ago when Donovan publicly threatened to destroy my career. Watching me carry a cardboard box to the elevators. Now they were watching the newly appointed Senior Director of Operations being led away in handcuffs. Orch. Marcus tried to duck his head to hide his tear-stained face, but the officers pushed him forward at a brisk, relentless pace. Whispers swept across the floor like wildfire, and smartphones were discreetly raised to record the historic downfall of the most arrogant man in the building. His public execution was absolute, broadcast live to his peers, subordinates, and rivals. Orch. The man who had stolen my achievements to secure a suburban mansion loan was now walking toward a concrete holding cell. I watched him disappear into the elevator bay, feeling the crushing weight of my family's toxic expectations vanish right along with him. Inside, the conference room, the real corporate destruction was just beginning. Orch. CEO Maxwell turned his back to the glass wall and faced the remaining executives, his expression a mask of pure concentrated fury. He didn't raise his voice, but his low rumbling tone commanded absolute terror. "For 3 years, my company trusted Apex Tech Solutions with millions of dollars in freight logistics every single day," Maxwell said coldly, glaring at the panicked board members. "Orch. We trusted your infrastructure, and we trusted your executive oversight. Today, I walk into this room to find your network completely paralyzed, your intellectual property owned by a private third party, and your senior director actively siphoning over $1 million from my holding account to fund his offshore vault." Orch. Donovan opened his mouth, stammering frantically as he tried to offer an excuse. "Mr. Maxwell, I assure you, we had no knowledge of his illegal activities. We were misled by his performance reports." "You were misled because you are grossly incompetent," Maxwell interrupted, instantly shutting Donovan down. "Orch. You promoted a thief to manage your largest client because you failed to run even a basic forensic audit on your own internal architecture. You allowed personal bias and blind arrogance to override basic security protocols. I am formally terminating our operating contract with Apex Tech Solutions, effective immediately. Orch. Our legal team will be in touch regarding the massive financial damages caused by your negligence." Maxwell didn't wait for a response. He adjusted his suit jacket, gave me a deeply respectful nod, acknowledging my role in stopping the theft, and swept out of the room. His departure sucked whatever oxygen was left right out of the room. Orch. Losing the Vanguard account meant immediate, irreversible bankruptcy for Apex. The company was financially dead. The chairman of the board stood up from his seat at the mahogany table, his face turning purple with rage as he turned his furious gaze directly onto Donovan. "Orch, you personally bypassed HR to fast-track that criminal into executive management." The chairman roared, slamming his fist onto the table. "You ignored warnings about software licensing, and you drove our most valuable asset right out the building just to protect your own ego. You single-handedly destroyed this entire company." Orch. Donovan shrank back into his chair, raising his hands in a weak defensive posture. "We can restructure," Donovan pleaded, his voice trembling. "I can call other investors. I can save this quarter." "Go pack your desk right now," the chairman bellowed, waving over 2 corporate security guards standing near the entrance. "You are fired, Donovan." Orch. Terminated immediately with 0 severance for gross managerial negligence, extreme nepotism, and creating catastrophic corporate liability. Security will escort you out, and you will never set foot in this building again. Donovan looked completely broken. Orch. The bully who had threatened to blacklist me from the entire industry was officially ruined, disgraced, fired, and facing immense civil liability. Security stepped forward, yanked him from his chair, and marched him toward his corner office to oversee his humiliating exit. Orch. With the immediate threats neutralized, Harrison walked to the center of the table, looking down at the remaining pale, sweating corporate lawyers. "Gentlemen," Harrison said smoothly, adjusting his tie. "As my client previously stated, we will be formally filing a $5 million lawsuit for intellectual property infringement and unauthorized network intrusion." Orch. "Given what just transpired in this room, I strongly advise you to convince the remaining board members to settle as quickly as possible. Dragging this through federal court will only generate even more devastating publicity for whatever is left of your company." Harrison placed a fresh business card on the table. Orch. "You have 24 hours to contact my office and finalize settlement negotiations. If we don't hear from you, we will serve the injunction publicly." I reached out and picked up my heavy black binder. I didn't need to say another word. My evidence had spoken louder than any argument ever could. I took one last look around the wrecked conference room, soaking in the total victory. Orch. Turning my back on the terrified executives, I pushed open the heavy glass door and walked down the carpeted hallway, my heels clicking out a steady, triumphant rhythm. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and watched the doors slowly close on the ashes of that corporate empire. The $5 million settlement was secured, and my future belonged entirely to me.